Hello, I'm Stephen Matchett from Campus Morning Mail, and this is Expert Opinion, where we ask people who know what's going on in education, what's going on. Expert Opinion is brought to you by Twig Marketing, Australia's original higher ed comms consultancy. Got a comms issue? Tim Winkler and Amanda Johnson will find the best solution for you. Check them out at twigmarketing, all lowercase.com. Whatever COVID does next, it has already changed teaching and learning forever. Online is now a column, not a support, which means universities and colleges must keep learning and adapting. And that in turn creates a question. Can they do it all themselves, or do they need to bring in specialist help? Dawn Gilmore from RMIT and Chinh Nguyen from Consultants Curio explore what this involves in Campus Morning Mail this week. It's in commissioning editor Sally Kift's excellent series, Needed Now in Learning and Teaching. And Drs Gilmore and Nguyen are with me now to extend the discussion. Dr. Gilmore, Dr. Nguyen, hello to you both.
Hello.
In Campus Morning Mail this week, you pose two questions for colleges and universities. What parts of teaching and learning do you want to keep in-house? And if you decide that you can't do it all, who do you look for? What sort of organisations do you look for to help? So let me start with that first question. What are the core parts of teaching and learning that can be outsourced in terms of actual production and support, and what can't? Dr. Nguyen?
Yes, absolutely. I can start with that. In terms of what they can do in-house, obviously they're looking at the curriculum, for example. They can build that curriculum in-house, but with support from the industry partner, especially subject matter expert, to bring in the industry people, knowledges and current practice into the curriculum. They can also use the learning design services from the partner who are outside the universities to help them with some of the best practice in learning design for online delivery. And of course, the third part of it is to get some support from the industry partner to deliver those online programs to the online learners across the world. So in terms of what I'm saying is three main things. Curriculum, they can keep some part in-house. They can also do the hiring subject matter expert to support, and also the online facilitators to facilitate those courses to the online learners.
But aren't universities well enough resourced to be able to do that internally in terms of their own learning management experts?
Well, Stephen, I think they can. They can have those people in-house, but their capacity probably could be a bit of a problematic there. They might be senior lecturers, B or C level, for example. They're engaged in so many other things with their face-to-face classes. As you know, right now, all of these classes are back to the normal environment. So for the online, particularly, they must have somebody, some other hands-on deck to help and delivery, to build the course within, say, for example, 16 weeks. And then launch it, to the market as well. I see that there's a lot of strategies there for university, because some universities they might want to have a multiple prongs in terms of what they want to do. So they may have an on-campus strategies. They want to have a blended strategy. They also have an online strategy. They also want an onshore. They also want an offshore strategy. So what exactly do they want? And like building a course, you only have a number of academic to tap onto. And you also want an industry person to help with the practices from the industry, so that your student will basically hit the ground and run when they complete the course. So that's what I want to get at.
What about in de facto in-house agencies where you've got a bunch of specialists who are on the university payroll who can do this? In fact, I think a number of universities do. Dr. Gilmore, is this something that you can do in-house?
Absolutely. And even in the US, there are some examples of, instead of going to an OPM, setting up an internal OPM or a central unit that will do the learning design and the delivery for you. But when you engage with the company, it's often about either moving fast. So you're trying to beat other universities to a certain market or a certain discipline, or you're filling a capability gap that you might not have immediately, but you could have in 7 years from now. So it's an opportunity to not miss out. You partner up and you've got the partners to run it for as long as it takes you to simultaneously start building up that internal capability or your internal engines that can have a clean handover when you're ready. Because ultimately, there's a lot of people out trying to grab the students, and it's getting more and more competitive. So you've got to keep them and maintain that, or you could end up losing your students.
Which raises a question that fascinates me: is what do you do about offshore, about other cultures where you're teaching offline? I don't know, but I imagine people learn engineering pretty much the same way across cultures, but there are going to be a bunch of disciplines where they don't. Medicine would be an obvious example, health in general. Is there room now? Are the skills emerging to address those sorts of questions?
I think we're seeing that coming out of Arizona State University. So they're delivering different programs. I can't think of what they are off the top of my head in China, for example. But I think that question is more about your credentialing body. So, who's the local credentialing body when you go offshore, and how are you responding to that versus the Australian ones, which we would know quite well and be working closely with.
But what about cultural differences? I mean, the example of health, there'll be a whole bunch of assumptions that I don't know in Chinese culture about the way you conduct with a patient compared to here. And that's the sort of thing you will need expertise to address.
And I think that's so you can work with different companies to hire locally. Chinh, does Curio do that, for example?
Yes, we're looking at the Australian market and providing online facilitators to the Australian market, but we're also looking and teaching a program overseas, for example.
And
so,
in the UK,
in the UK as well. So obviously the practices, the differences in terms of culture, the legal framework. So the facilitators, for example, must know all of these nuances and also knowledge of those legal framework overseas in the UK, for example, in order to teach into those markets. Because obviously the learners, they also learn like a global kind of global and local knowledges and practices at the same time. Yeah. So I suppose with your questions, Stephen, I would say they would have to do some kind of a blended model where some part of it will be delivered online. Maybe, I would say 50% will be delivering online, and then they would then either come to the host country, Australia, for example, to study, the remaining to meet the requirement of the accreditation bodies that accredit both in Australia and also in their own countries as well. Because, students from China, for example, India, for example, when they study in Australia, they might complete part of it in their own countries. And then to meet the requirement of the accreditation body in that countries when they return to work over there, and also they are qualified to work in Australia as well. So I suppose that's a combination of approaches. Should be.
It raises all sorts of questions about accreditation, which I think probably are for another time. But I can imagine the challenges for TEXA are going to be quite significant in dealing with a lot of this in terms of pedagogy. Is learning management professionals in ed tech professionals in universities, are there enough of them, or is it all, or we are still scrambling to create a new discipline on the run?
I think that there's a bit of both. I think that there is a bit of scrambling to create not necessarily a discipline, but a sense of legitimacy. And a lot of people thought that you could get that credibility off the back of COVID with the pivot into the online space. But as some of the research came out from that, showing that those roles just were copying and pasting and moving things online. They weren't designing online curriculum for that end-to-end online experience. So Chinh and I are working on another paper where we're mapping the career trajectories and the career paths of learning designers. And at the moment, it is an ad hoc trajectory where people, don't necessarily have a background in education. And this is because it's supply and demand. And at the moment, demand is high.
And yet I could see a world where you'll actually get specialists, people who basically are ed tech learning management designers in the humanities. I mean, I've been thinking about what you've written in the last day or so, and thinking in terms of things that interest me. It would be fascinating to see someone put together a course on the creation of the United States Constitution, which would be way different to someone teaching someone thermodynamics.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what do we do? The pros you set out in your CMM article are that industry partners can teach niche skills, that you can the institutions can reach fast in new markets to get share, and they don't have to do it themselves. Are they the strengths? I mean, they all, I can see, bring limitations in terms of people having to adjust to cultures that are not willing to accept.
Where I can start on that one, I think on the pro side of things, I agree with you that the pros can be part of the cons as well. But the pro is actually quite evident in a way that, because there's so much knowledge out there, at the moment, and it's come from the industry, from partners and organization, from things that are other than the university. So some research actually point to that, increasingly more courses from Coursera and edX, for example, that are built not with university. I think it's about 40% of it right now this year, actually coming from the industry. So industry partners here actually mean a lot, because it actually bring in the currencies of the expertise and the knowledge, and the student can learn that immediately from them.
Looking at all the industry specific or company specific accreditations for Google, through Google and Amazon and the like, what's the quality like in terms of their learning management platforms, without being specific?
I think the quality is good. It attracts a lot of learners. They allow learners to upskill themselves on the go, on their jobs, to learn things that they want to learn. And a lot of this is actually in data science, so that people can actually support their, basically, learn to earn, those kind of program. And a lot of this come from the US as well.
I think as well, when you start to engage with the private space to deliver a service, it takes on a different commitment. So you're a customer now, or a client, and you can hold them accountable to different sorts of deliveries or different sorts of tech requirements that you can't always do when you're working inside of university constraints. So when you're considering, like if you want to say, bring down the build time, that's something that you can build into a partner contract. Whereas when you're working on campus, you're often limited to things outside of your control, the 37.5-hour work week, the EBA, those sorts of things. So there's space in this to push the service boundaries within partnership service models and deliveries and resource building.
I can imagine a large number of people in university systems would suggest they're probably pretty much flat out as did already on that, and that opportunities of managements may not appear the same way to them.
Pardon, opportunities to
what management sees as opportunities may not strike people actually at the coalface.
Yes, I imagine so, because it appears to sound more like a business decision, and that's where you start to get business versus education philosophical arguments.
Oh, and where does creativity come into this? I'm thinking of Colin Simpson, who writes from Monash, who writes this fantastic column of what's happening in EdTech in the week for CMM. And some of the stuff he writes about is just marvelous. It's just enormous. It just sounds like fun.
And isn't that what always happens when we start to collaborate? So collaborating with startups who often attract some of the smartest people in the job market, and collaborating with the big four, like all of this brings those sorts of benefits, so that not only can you be creative, you can be creative faster. You can take something that may not have scaled at a university, and because you've got a different team behind it, you might be able to scale it because of those sorts of collaborations that start bubbling away. So I always think, why do we do group work? It's kind of like the same answer, right? So that we can learn from other people, so that we can appreciate other strengths, so that we can do things faster. And this all applies to this space as well, and it's what makes it really exciting.
To tap on that, on what Don was saying, it was, I think from my point of view, it was the market actually rule and weed all of these inefficiencies out. And company, outside company or partners, they have KPI to actually meet with the contract, for example. So, and they won't be able to survive without meeting or exceeding those standards.
Tell me about how this can all apply to micro-credentials. I mean, everyone's in favour of them. Nobody quite knows what they are or how to apply them. But they're going to need, bite-sized information bases.
I think it needs to be bite-sized, but also it's that idea of responding quickly. So responding quickly, so that as a sector or whatever area the credentials being tailored for, you can skill those people up, and then boom, it might be done. It might not be something that continues to go on, because the point is skill transfer. And once people have those skills, what's next? And then maybe, that's more about then where else in the world can you start pushing it? But yeah, I think when I think of micro credentials, I think of, being able to really deliver quickly.
Well, I mean, but I'm thinking perhaps not so much in universities, but in vet. The enormous amount of very specific training people need to do, often to meet government regulatory requirements. It just seems like an obvious place to be able to develop. Is anybody across that yet? Is anybody thinking about that as a market?
Yes, I would say there's a number of projects we do over in the tech sectors as well. For a number of tech clients, I would say micro-credential in the tech would work as well. But the thing is, they have a lot of the practicum, the practicum sessions where they have to go and meet with the instructors and basically do the test or do the preparations, do the practice, so that they'll be able to meet the standard and pass the standard. And I think there's a competency, there's a lot of competency-based work in the tech sector, which I think the micro-credential would work beautifully.
What about how are you going to deal with university managements on this? Where is the budget going to come from? I mean, there's not that much money floating around, but how do you make a case for redeploying scarce resources into this?
Dawn, you want to go first?
I guess, well, you either highly specialize, or you come up with ideas that can be rolled out to the masses.
Okay. Chinh?
Well, I think for me, I think the most important thing is probably about aligning strategies for online education with your institutional missions and purpose as well. And then you got your another thing is that you probably you need partnership, because you cannot go do it alone. And also in the changing nature and patterns of student demand and their expectation as well. So how do you match that one, your client, your student client, with your own purpose, and then obviously spare some money to pay, maybe just have a creative little arms, just an arm length away from university to develop that hot house.
And it doesn't always have to be outside. So Chinh and I have been speaking with colleagues at Open Universities UK as well, and they've always championed this sort of model. But even today, so after like all these years, they're starting to see some of that work trickle back into the university. So it might be about, what are the timelines for when it should be what's that timeline and cycle for partnering and returning the capability, so that, it might be a loss initially, but it doesn't have to be a loss forever. And by loss, I mean profit.
Is there enough on the psychology of learning yet about how this can actually not save money, but how benefit and enhance undergraduate learning? Is there enough research yet?
In partnering, I think, well, like the three things that jump out in terms of how how undergraduates benefit is that 24/7 support that can be offered.
Yep.
So, the traditional way that Australian universities, well, many universities around the world, is that you can see your support services from 9 to 5. And now if you're partnering with companies in different time zones, that sort of support can be around the clock. I think Studiosity is another good example of that. So if we think about our students as lifelong learners, they've got a lot more going on now. They're juggling different sorts of priorities. Then when you start to partner this, you're meeting them during different times of both their journey, their time of day. If you can really nail down your student profile, then you can use that sort of information to target the exact partner that can help retain that student. I think that same could be said about learning design.
But what about questions of the way people acquire and retain and process information on screens as opposed to an interface of like a physical contact? Is it too early for us to know how people do that and how it's changing, if it is?
No, it's not. I think a lot of the learning design for the online coursework has used a lot of neurological and psychological, as well as the andragogy aspect into the learning design of those course curriculum, and they will basically apply those techniques in order to build those courses for the benefit of the learners. Things like chunking, for example. Chunking. So they build bits and pieces of learning.
Chunking.
Chunking, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So in bits and pieces of about 5 to 8 minutes, for example, with an activities. So you define the activities. What is it? So you're explaining it. You give example of it. You give some kind of activities that help students to regurgitate what concept that is, and then they start playing with it, and they start reflecting on that activities, for example. So there's a whole thing probably about 10 minutes, and that fits student on the go on a train, for example. They can fit the whole thing, and then and then they start building all of that throughout. It's very interactive, and if it's actually supported with Curiosity, for example, or with an online learning facilitators that respond to them within 24 hours, and also with the discussion board, the student can actually support and learn from one another, across different time zones. It's very interactive. If you do want to put a time, into it, and yeah, as you know, as in anything, that you get much out of it, because you put so much into it. That's from me.
But in terms of the pure science, if that's the answer you're looking for, I think there's still a lot to be done in that space. At the moment, we're still talking about, activity-based learning and authentic assessment, and everybody's championing these sorts of ideas. But I think that we're still waiting for bigger pieces of research.
Okay. What would you both say if you were invited, as I'm sure you have been, into a common room to talk to a group of academic and professional staff involved in learning delivery who are skeptical? They worry about the possibility of their jobs in the long term. They're nervous about changing models that have worked for generations. What do you say? Do you tell them, well, it's a brave new world and we're all going to have to face it, or are there ways to reassure them?
Well, I think we can, you might walk into the room and what do I say about that? I would say, innovation have to start from somewhere, and it's enabled by people start picking up things and start learning bits and pieces here and there, because learning is a progress, right? So even if their job is there at the moment, they still have to keep learning and doing other things, or basically upskilling themselves and learn and do other things. So I suppose I just give you an example with all of this teaching and learning support officer, for example. Previously, that was an on-campus delivery, right? So you come and see student face to face and help them with this assignment, with questions, with references and things like that on a face-to-face development. Now you just move it to online and support them in an online space. So you move and improve yourself and upskill yourself to do the same thing, basically, but it's in a different form.
Gilmore?
Yeah.
And I would probably also remind them, like what we're talking about here in many ways is unbundling. And when you unbundle one part of university, who is it freeing time up for? So this is about enabling academics. So we don't want them to build the course. We want them to lean on the learning designer who has that skill set to build the course and be the SME. So then what does that afford them? What other opportunities does that then free up as well? And the concept of unbundling has been around for, decades, and we still have universities. They're not going anywhere.
Which is, I think, a good place to end on. Dr. Dawn Gilmore is from the Centre for Academic Quality and Engagement at RMIT, and Dr. Chinh Nguyen is a senior consultant and online programs manager at Curio. I hope you'll come back and talk to us when your new paper is ready. And thank you very much for sparing me the time. I know you're busy, and I'm grateful. And that's Campus Morning Mail's Expert Opinion, and we're out.